Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth isn't working out all that well. And it started right at the beginning. Right after he was sworn in, there was the mid-air collision of a passenger jet and an Army helicopter in Washington, D.C., despite the strict and solemn rules of the Defense Department that say no information about deceased service members can be made public until 24 hours after the next of kin has been informed. Pete Hegseth, nevertheless, blurted out to the public the ranks of the 3 helicopter crew members who had just been killed in the crash. Hegseth also blurted out that the crew members had been performing a training flight on a, quote, continuity of government mission. Mr. Hegseth, quote, was later told that he should not have publicly disclosed that it was a continuity of government mission, which involves U.S. officials and military forces practicing how the government would react in the event of an emergency. Just a couple of weeks later, Mr. Hegseth took his first big international trip as defense secretary, went to a big NATO meeting in Europe, and he began the trip by just totally flummoxing not only our allies, but also a lot of Washington, when he again just blurted out that any peace deal in the Russia-Ukraine war would have to include Ukraine giving up lots of its territory and abandoning its bid to join NATO. That caused major blowback. For obvious reasons, he was just giving away Ukraine's major bargaining chips even before negotiations had started. When that blowback made its way to him, Pete Hegseth sort of angrily asserted that he had basically been the victim of his own comments.
As it pertains to NATO membership not being realistic outcome for negotiations, that's something that was stated as part of my remarks here, as part of the coordination with how we're executing these ongoing negotiations.
That's something that was stated as part of my remarks here. I don't know who stated it, but it was part of my remarks. I did not state it. It was something that was stated by something inside my mouth in my remarks time. It's very offensive to me as well. Now we're all living through Pete Hegseth's latest and greatest.
Details shared on Signal, and how did you learn that a journalist was privy to the targets, the types of weapons used?
I've heard I was characterized. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
That's it. The NSC said it was authentic.
Nobody's texting war plans. I know exactly what I'm doing, exactly what we're directing, and I'm really proud of what we accomplished. Nobody's texting war plans. You know who sees war plans? I see them. Every single day. I looked at them this morning.
Nobody's texting war plans. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know what war plans look like. War plans, I see them all the time. I eat war plans for breakfast. There were no war plans. What do you mean? I wouldn't know if there were war... Meanwhile, headline, here are the attack plans that Trump's advisors shared on Signal. Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic magazine today releasing the entirety of the Signal message chain that he was somehow inexplicably added to, in which top Trump administration officials texted in detail about forthcoming airstrikes in Yemen. And despite Pete Hegseth and other officials in the chat saying there was no classified information and definitely no war plans, here is Pete Hegseth texting on a private messaging app to a group including a reporter, times and weapons and attack sequences about 2 hours before the first bombs exploded. Senator Tammy Duckworth, an Army helicopter pilot who lost both legs in combat, she now serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee. She had this to say today in response. This is an official statement released by her Senate office. I will warn you, it contains a thinly veiled swear. Statement says, quote, Pete Hegseth is a effing liar. This is so clearly classified info he recklessly leaked that could have gotten our pilots killed. He needs to resign in disgrace immediately. Senator Tammy Duckworth joins us here next.